Please be warned. Inspired by a true story deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence, and is intended for a mature audience.
September 1975. Suffering from either psychosis or demonic possession, a young woman begins undergoing an exorcism that will lead to her eventual death. In 2005, director Scott Derrickson delivers a film based off of these true events that posits the question of what is good and what is evil. On this episode, the devil is in the details, and the Exorcism of Emily Rose was indeed inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is Inspired by a True Story, podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. We're going to discuss the overall details of the actual crimes. Is it a crime? I don't know. It depends. Then review the film on its own, how much of that is true and how much was Hollywood magic. You can find other episodes at thehollywoodoutsiders.com as always, and you can share your thoughts on this episode or even suggest a film you'd love for us to talk about at inspired@thehollywoodoutsiders.com. Our last episode, which was kicking off season 2, was The Conjuring. This is the second in a row of dealing with the devil, as it were. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and website. Joining me today are fellow film critics and true crime devotees, John Davenport.
Hey, buddy.
And Amanda Sink.
Hello, hello.
So, anybody summoned the devil lately?
Yeah, my Ouija board is right behind me, actually.
Do you really have a Ouija board right behind you?
No, absolutely. Oh. Look, there are certain things I will never have in my home. A Ouija board is one of them.
So you full on believe in this, right? Like you're concerned.
I don't full on believe, but I'm also not going to pretend that I know all and that I somehow have insight into whether it could be or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're afraid of the devil.
No,
yeah.
I can't disprove it. So who am I to say that it's not true? I just, look,
you're Amanda.
Because I can't disprove it, I'm like, I'd rather not take the chance.
I find this fascinating because of your devotion to psychiatry as a whole. This whole movie is really about psychiatry versus religion, in a way. The whole, not really, the true story part of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the movie is sort of too, because that's the entirety of the debate that's happening in the courtroom.
Sure. Well, I got to be honest. I had never seen this film.
Really?
Really?
I am not a big Scott Derrickson fan. I know many people are. I like Sinister enough. I didn't like Doctor Strange that much. I mean, he's just not somebody that excites me as a fan. And I'm also, I don't know if you guys noticed from the last episode, I'm a little bit of a Scully, right? I am a little bit of a skeptic. Don't buy into the whole exorcism thing. Whenever somebody has an exorcism, my first inclination is to go, well, they're probably just, nervous, and that's what's shaking the bed. It's not the devil. Maybe they got to pee really bad and they can't get up, so the bed starts vibrating. That's kind of where I go.
What now?
It's fair. You're not wrong in that.
If my needing the pee is vibrating the bed so bad that it's jumping up and down, then it's got to be in my head, right?
Get the prostate checked. That's what I'm saying.
All right.
Exhaust all medical options first before you call in Father Moore in this case.
Well, I mean, technically, you can call him in for a prostate check, too.
Weird. Oh, no. Stop it. Stop it. That took me longer than it should have. I don't like it. Moving on, as of this recording of the podcast, The Exorcism of Emily Rose is available for streaming on any online retailer, but that is always subject to change. The plot of which is Emily Rose is dead. How and why she died is going on trial as Father Moore is arrested for negligent homicide. But did Father Moore neglect the true medical needs of his patient, or was Emily Rose in fact possessed by demons from another realm? Defending attorney Erin Bruner, played by Laura Linney, who I did not know was in the... I knew nothing about this film. I am sad to say.
And it was so great to have her, by the way.
She is so good at everything she does. but she is determined to unmask all possibilities in order to defend her client. My only real complaint about this movie is she doesn't take the deal at the end. Are you nuts? You worked your whole life for that? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Anyway.
a little off.
Let's talk about what really happened to the true girl that this is based around. New episodes are released every 2 weeks, can be found wherever you listen to podcasts or at thehollywoodoutsiders.com. You can always hear episodes early by supporting the show at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsiders. Film and true crime fans alike are always debating how true their true crime is. It's time to put the everlasting battle between God and the devil on trial. This is the truth behind The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Anna Elizabeth Michel was born on September 21st, 1952 to Joseph and Anna Michel in Leibelfing, Bavaria in West Germany. The family was Roman Catholic, and Anna Elizabeth, who was known to those who loved her as Anneliese, also had 3 sisters. The Michels were a deeply devout family. She regularly attended church, attending Mass twice a week. But in 1968, Anneliese began a change. It started with a seizure. Anneliese was 16 when these seizures began, and doctors almost immediately concluded that she had developed temporal lobe epilepsy. Temporal lobe epilepsy begins in the brain. These areas process emotions and are important for short-term memory. It's a brain disorder that causes unprovoked seizures and is the most common type of focal onset epilepsy among adults. And about 6 out of 10 people with focal epilepsy have this kind. Symptoms, so that you know, include a peculiar smell, such as burning rubber, strong emotions, such as fear or panic, abdominal chest discomfort, automatic, unconsciously repeated movements or convulsions, staring, and loss of awareness. Now that you know the symptoms, let's talk about what happened. In 1970, Anneliese is hospitalized for tuberculosis and continues experiencing psychiatric symptoms, including hallucinations and voices. She also has a 3rd seizure. The narcotic she was prescribed did not seem to work. She stated she was seeing devil's faces. The obvious solution was to place her on drugs to treat the epilepsy and control the seizures and convulsions and treat the psychosis. In other words, a lot more drugs. In 1973, Anneliese attended the University of Würzburg, and things began to escalate. She began hearing voices, damning her to hell. Her classmates intimated that Anneliese had become withdrawn and very religious. Anneliese became increasingly depressed as well, and seemingly fearful of what awaited her with her current condition. Despite being treated with antipsychotics and anti-seizure medications, Anneliese's condition worsened. She became averse to religious objects, especially crucifixes. She exhibited extreme behavior and continued having visions of demonic faces. Her depression worsened, and she was becoming increasingly skeptical of medical solutions to her issues. When Anneliese visited San Damiano, a church with a monastery near Assisi, Italy, with a friend, she claimed she was unable to enter because an unknown force would not allow her. Her friend later said that she was unable to drink holy water, nor walk past a spring. Obviously, she's a vampire. I am unsure if this is relevant to the story or to you, the listener, but I find this an important fact to point out. The Exorcist book released in May of 1971, and the film released in December of 1973, both extremely popular. The material itself is loosely based on a real-life case from 1949 where Father William Bowdern performed a series of exorcisms on a 14-year-old boy. You decide if any of that matters to you. Back to Anneliese. She became increasingly convinced she could communicate with Mary, the mother of Jesus. Anneliese's mother, in fact, was also convinced she saw the stigmata on her daughter, which are wounds on the body corresponding to the wounds of Jesus Christ as he was nailed to the cross. Anneliese's parents became increasingly convinced that she was possessed and spoke to numerous priests about an exorcism, which they declined without the Catholic Church's express permission. In November 1973, Michel began treatment with Tegretol, an anti-seizure drug and mood stabilizer. She was also prescribed antipsychotic drugs during the course of the religious rites and consumed them frequently until sometime before her eventual death. Despite taking these, Anneliese's symptoms actually worsened. She was frequently in a psychotic state, eating bugs, drinking her own urine, throwing items, even growling, and even allegedly once ate the head off of a dead bird. The situation was growing dire. In 1975, the Michel family consulted with Father Ernst Alt, who became convinced Anneliese was possessed and started seeking out approval for an exorcism. Bishop Joseph Stengel granted Father Arnold Renz permission to perform an exorcism, but he ordered total secrecy. The fact that the church ordered it was never to get out. It was alleged that she was possessed by 6 demons: Lucifer, Cain, Judas Iscariot, Nero, Hitler, and an evil priest. It's quite a club. In the exorcism procedure, the person possessed may be restrained so that in the view of the church, they do not harm themselves nor any person present. The exorcist then prays and commands for the demons to retreat. The Catholic priest recites certain prayers, the Lord's Prayer, Hail Mary, or the Athanasian Creed. Catholic.org maintains the appropriate prayers online if you are so inclined. I would recite them here, but I don't want to disrupt any Halloween plans you might have. On September 24th, 1975, the first exorcism session is performed by Father Arnold Renz. Apparently, Father Renz did not scare the devil one iota, because over the course of the next 10 months, from 1975 through 1976, Anneliese and Michel, for up to 4 hours apiece each time, underwent a total of 67 exorcisms. And you heard me correctly, 67. As the Washington Post explained, Anneliese's sense of responsibility to atone for the sins of her generation did not end just because of the near ceaseless exorcism rituals. During the 10-month period of her exorcisms, Anneliese began talking about the possibility of sacrificing her own life on behalf of the rebellious youth and sinful priests she considered to be plaguing the modern era. By this point, she had requested not to be treated medically for her epilepsy any longer, relying fully on the priest's exorcisms, and had stopped eating altogether, planning to starve herself to death to atone for the sins of others. Her plan was to be a martyr. On July 1st, 1976, the exorcism stopped, as Anna Elizabeth Michel was pronounced dead. She had contracted pneumonia and lost her life due to malnutrition and dehydration. Anneliese had been starving herself for the better part of a year. When she died, at the age of 23 years old, she weighed between 66 and 68 pounds, depending on various reports. Reportedly, Anneliese's last words were, quote, "Pray for forgiveness," and, quote, "Mama, I'm afraid." Prosecutors and investigators determined that Anneliese's death could have been prevented as much as 1 week before her death, and they charged Joseph and Anna Michel, along with Fathers Ernst Alt and Arnold Renz, with negligent homicide. The parents retained Nuremberg defense attorney Erich Schmidt-Leichner, and the priests retained counsel secured by the church. The state actually recommended at the outset that none of the parties be jailed, no matter the conviction, and just fined and documented their crimes. Weird. Much like the film, Exorcism was very much on trial, and the tapes of these exorcisms were actually played on tape for the court, even claiming that portions of the audio were actually demon yelling. They also stated that the last exorcism was successful, and Anneliese was finally freed of her demons right before her death. The bishop admitted he was not made aware of Anneliese's medical health, or he would have immediately ceased the exorcisms. And if it takes a year to knock out all these demons, I might suggest you call in the B team, personally, but bishop's gonna bishop. Eventually, all four, the Michels and Father Alt and Renz, were found guilty of negligent homicide, but each were given suspended prison sentences. They were free to go. A few years later, German bishops completely retracted the claim that Anneliese was even possessed. The Michel family, though, never doubted their choices in this case, the choices that led to the death of their daughter. They remained committed until their final days, and specifically stated that they had no regrets. These are tales as old as time. Good versus evil, God versus the devil. Skeptics will claim her family and those priests straight up murdered Anneliese Michel. Believers will claim that was simply a sad end to a tragic case, but one that was necessary to save Anneliese's soul. Wherever you land, I am certain you are confident in that belief. No matter which angle you take, one thing is for sure. Anneliese Michel did not have to die. Whether a psychotic break or demonic possession, this young woman suffered for the better part of a decade and only found relief through her own horrific passing. Everyone involved could have and should have done more, as was determined by a court of law. And honestly, common sense. So why didn't they? Is personal belief truly that much more important than scientific fact? Is faith worth the possibility of losing a person you love? As a society, we are often concerned with everyone else being wrong, constantly asking why they can't see what's right in front of them. Why can't that person just do the research or see that faith is very complicated? We all ask these questions or take these stances from time to time. Now, instead, maybe take a minute, breathe, and ask yourself, what if you're wrong? So that is the tale of Anneliese Michel. That is horrific, that is very sad, and I don't know how to feel about it. Because I also come from a very religious family myself. I understand when people feel vehemently passionate about the religious choices that are in front of them and what path they need to stay on. But I also have the part of me that comes from a more medical background, and I just don't understand.
Well, so I think a couple of the things that come to mind for me is, regardless of how you feel about exorcisms, whether it's legitimate or there's no legitimacy, or you believe in demons or you don't believe in demons, you believe in God, but you don't believe in God, whatever that looks like for you, I think ultimately what we have to keep in mind for this particular case is that there's a couple of things that help me when I'm thinking about it. Is one, there was at one point an entire year between when she had one experience and when it started to increase to a I guess escalated experience. So, and then there was like 5 years of being treated for her epilepsy, for also there's a condition, a syndrome that's associated with those temporal lobe epileptic seizures, which can create like hyper religiousness. I don't know what the right word is, but I think it's like hyper religiosity or some shit like that. But regardless, she had a background too from her mom and her family that you had to repent for your sins. So her mom had a kid that was like born out of wedlock or whatever, but I think the kid died. And then it became one of those things in the family from Anna, the mom, hey, we all have to repent for our sins. We need to like do better and be by Christ. So you start to integrate and like heavily emphasize religious notions on your family and that they need to repent for sins, even though you're the one who sinned. And so I think that that's a contributing factor as well. So when I like kind of evaluate this situation, and there's so much medical information documented for years for her. This isn't like she got a diagnosis and then 5 months later she's having it's escalated and then maybe that's when she gets her diagnosis or something. Like this was over a 5-year period. That's significant. That is not consistent with how, if you do believe in demonic possessions, how those historically have also played out. So I feel like even if you believe in demons or you don't, it's kind of irregardless, because it's more if you just evaluate Anneliese's situation to how other demonic possessions have been handled, it's not the same. It makes it a lot harder to believe that there is legitimacy to needing that exorcism.
And it's actually
70 sometimes or whatever.
I mean, it started in 1968, so it was actually 8 years from start till sadly finish. But, it was a long period of time this occurred.
The one thing that I do get hung up on, though, is that over 5 years and her medication didn't help her.
Yeah.
Now, I know we weren't in a good state when it comes to diagnoses.
Or mental health at all.
Yeah, mental health in general, but also the medications that were being prescribed and were created. So there's some potential that falls on just the period of time. But for those that are religious and that do believe in these things, I can absolutely still see why someone would say, there's the potential there. But this was also kind of a root cause for changing the rite on exorcisms within the Catholic diocese, because they actually updated it shortly after and essentially tried to make it more of an approval through the through the church, because this one did skate around the process.
Well, I mean, yeah. Can you imagine? So Bob, we need to get together. So, I mean, at what point do we maybe call in somebody's got a bigger cross? You know what I mean? Because at 67, I'm thinking someone should have got a memo. Somebody should have had a phone call. There should have been a meeting. The Pope should have been involved at that point. Like, wait. How do we get to 67? Because I'm thinking at 8, you start going, maybe we don't know how to do this right.
There's a couple of things in there that make me wonder. A couple of average everyday priests are going to go up against Lucifer, Cain, Judas, Nero, and Hitler, and an evil priest. Yeah. Now, if it was,
and why are they all hanging together? By the way, is there like a book club in hell?
Right.
It's called hell. They're hanging out either in hell or purgatory.
Fair enough. They're probably part of the management program. I get it.
Employee of the Month awards.
I would actually find it more believable if it was like the demons were Steve the janitor and George the grocer and Bob the butcher. If those were all the demons as opposed to the ones we got, because we got an all-star team of demons in here. That's why this took 67 attempts, because, again, all-star. huge demons.
The devil was just trying to get up to 69. Let's be honest.
Nice. That there's a lot.
Wow. Wow, that took a turn.
Yeah.
Well, he's the devil. That's wrong, right? He's the devil. That's bad.
Yeah.
Sinning.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
The referendum that this plays on the idea of mental health and exorcism combined is one of the things they changed about exorcism is that they're not going to allow the exorcist to address the demon any longer within the victim or the possessed, because what happens is, if it is in their mind, let me just say it that way, in their mind or the exorcist's mind or the church's mind, if this is a person who is suffering from mental health, not addressing the demon directly or the possessor or possessee. Anyways, if it is a mental health thing, addressing the demons or monsters directly adds to the credence that this is actually happening to the person. That's why they changed some of the rules of exorcism the way they did.
I understand that in the 70s, things were completely different. I mean, you're talking 50 years ago. I mean, it was a different time. I get it. I understand it. Mental health was not where it is now. We really understand it more. We understand psychosis more. You know, if you've ever known anyone who is schizophrenic or had a severe mental disease, you know that the polarity can switch from zero to extreme in no time. I mean, it just happens, and it can go all over the map. It can be calling you all sorts of names. It can be thinking they're seeing visions or hearing voices or whatever it is. You know, there's so much that can go into that would be more accountable now versus then. I understand that. At the same time, hearing the real story, right? Easy jokes aside, I apologize if we said any jokes that offended anyone. Well, I not deeply apologize, but I do a little bit. I did.
Let's qualify it real quick.
I come from a religious family. Like, I really respect faith. I do. And I don't want anyone to walk away from this podcast thinking just because I'm skeptical of things, it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate or understand faith or even have faith myself. It's just a matter of I see it differently than those in my family who are, on one side of my family, are very extremely religious, and that's their absolute right. On my other side, it's a lot more of skeptics. So I just can't fathom as a father, as a husband, as a human being, looking at my daughter or my wife or whatever the situation, and having this exact situation happen and not going, there's something wrong, and it's not the devil. I just can't fathom it. And maybe it's because I'm 50 years past this time frame, you know, so there's lots of education from this point. There's lots of internal medicine. There's lots of mental dissection and psychiatric advancement and pharmaceuticals that really, really treat these illnesses that were never, ever in existence before. Yes, I know all of that stuff applies, but also it's just common sense to me that I would know at some point you have to go, God isn't going to fix this. I need help. And that's where I get stuck. I can't fathom all of these people not going to jail, like spending significant time in jail. No matter how much they love their daughter, they allowed this to happen to her.
Yeah, and to be fair, okay.
And so I do believe they love their daughter. I'm not taking away from that. I do believe that. I've seen extreme faith.
She was an adult, and she was also vehemently in this belief that it was demonic possession herself.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a contributing factor that I take into consideration with the family is, one, they're all very religious, and then the person themselves is telling you that. However, yes, on the other side, it's their responsibility to also be properly assessing this. And when you get multiple rejections from priests who say you need to get medical attention, not demonic possession attention, then maybe you should adhere to that feedback rather than essentially going the route of confirmation bias and finding someone who's willing to do it for you. Because I think, to me, that speaks volumes about the circumstances around Anneliese, is that they attempted to go to multiple people before they finally got their approval.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the basis of, you know, we think that this is what's happening because this is what she's telling us, type of thing. And yes, what they're seeing is mortifying. It's horrible. I couldn't have even imagined being in their position. The one thing that I would also emphasize is that when someone who's in a state of psychosis is not going to be able to properly navigate their beliefs and understandings. So it's also, you have to take some of that with a grain of salt in terms of what the individual is telling you, because you have to recognize that they inherently, due to their condition, are having auditory and visual hallucinations, which are going to tell them something different. Now, it has been reported as being very consistent in schizophrenia patients, where they start to believe that the devil or something evil is telling them something bad, or to do something bad, or that there is something bad, whether that's to harm themselves, to harm somebody else, or that somebody is out to get them. And that's a key characteristic of schizophrenia as well, is that paranoia that this is coming to get me. And so if you have those innate religious beliefs, you know, if I were in that position and I had schizophrenia, my paranoia would be like random strangers coming in to break into my house and like get me, and I'd be convinced that somebody is stalking me or something like that. For her, she had this very deep core belief that religion was, you know, she had sins she needed to overcome, and that she had to make up for those sins for others. And that's where it starts to get a little bit more complicated. Is it's her belief in those things that can perpetuate and exacerbate everything that she's doing, right? Unintentionally.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a form of OCD that's called scrupulosity. It comes in two different flavors. There's the hyper religious version, or there's the hyper moral version. I've actually seen this in person through people I'm close with, because they have a son who is on that spectrum of the hyper religious OCD. These people, the parents, are in no way, shape, or form religious. Have never really raised the rest of their children in a religious sense, and this child's exposure to religion has been mainly through Christmas Mass, going to Easter Mass. That's it. And then all of a sudden, some light switch flipped on, and they are quoting scripture to you. They are making everything about God. It's a very strange thing to see, especially from a family in which they don't have the same kind of religious background as this kid does. It's and something that I think about often when I think about this case too.
One thing I always think about when you take into account faith versus medicine, right? It's a big difference for a lot of people. There are many people that would prefer to bank on religion rather than pharmaceutical treatment or medical treatment. And that, I believe, is you're right. I do believe that, Amanda, because you're talking to your point earlier. And unfortunately, I think we do live in a time when people forget that you have a right to live the life that you want to live. So if you have more faith in God than medicine, so be it. I think that's absolutely, you're right. You need to decide what to do with your own body. And I agree, she was apparently made it very clear that's what she wanted to do. She basically wanted assisted suicide at some point. That's what it boils down to. I just think a person that's going through that kind of environment consistently with that kind of pain that they're living with, obviously day to day, and has not been getting any medical treatment or sustenance or anything else, I believe that's when they're not making logical decisions, and you have to assist in some way, and you have to give. And I'm actually not against assisted suicide. I think there are conditions, there are ailments, there are, cancer is one where it can be a very debilitating disease, and it ends up causing just extreme grief, and people don't want to be remembered in that frail, horrible manner. They want to be remembered for who they were. And I understand that, and I think it's worth a conversation. I don't really have a firm stance either way. It's worth a conversation depending on the circumstances. But I think you have to be in the right mind frame to even have a conversation like that. And it's painfully obvious based on her condition, she was not in the right mind to have those conversations. I mean, she went through absolute hell, 67 exorcisms going over the course of years, and she was to the point of 66 or 68 pounds. It really just depends on which research you do. But she was very frail. She was obviously very frail. That reduces the opportunity for her to make a valid, conscious decision, in my viewpoint.
She was completely malnourished, right?
Absolutely.
And your brain can't function. It can't properly process and navigate things. And ultimately, her medication also was probably ineffective from that standpoint as well because you're so malnourished. Your body still needs food and water to survive. There are certain things that your body on a basic level needs. Your brain needs. Now, your brain in particular has an additional need that your body doesn't necessarily have. But one of those things is going to be that sustenance, the food and the water. So if you're depriving it of that, it's not able to work effectively. That's like putting one battery in a remote that requires two and saying, like, I think it'll turn the TV on. No, it needs two to be able to function right.
In the great words of Colt Seavers, you need carbohydrates. Your brain runs on glucose.
Your brain does run on glucose. I mean, I'm an avid backpacker, so I go out in the back in the woods and everything, and sometimes you won't, you're very limited on food. So if you go through it early, you don't have food. Trust me, I'm getting to a point. And I've gone on trips where I didn't eat really much for a couple of days, and I'm starting to look at the people I'm hiking with like, you would taste great. So I understand, like, your mind starts playing tricks pretty early after you become malnourished. After you become malnourished.
Survival.
Yeah.
There's two things I'm just learned about Erin with this podcast. Number one, don't be sick around Erin because he will just like take a pillow and put you out. And number two, don't let Erin get hungry.
I don't think I ever said anything alluding to the first one, but the second one is spot on. Yeah, spot on. I mean, I might even be like across the street from a parking lot, and I'm like, I don't know if we're gonna make it, guy. I don't know if we're gonna make it.
We got about 10 seconds before I'm a completely different human being.
So let me ask you: is it right, knowing what we know now about psychiatry, to allow exorcisms to even exist, or is faith always guaranteed? I mean, should this even be an option anymore? And I know it's a complicated topic, right? Because I'm not. You say, well, don't judge somebody else's religion, but that right there is a judgment of somebody's religion.
I have such a hard time with this because I personally would say, no, there's not a situation where exorcisms should be permitted because they're so grueling. They're so potentially unethical from a scientific standpoint. But when you look opposite of that standpoint and you consider people who have their faith, I also don't want to be the type of person who says your faith is harmful, because I don't feel like that's a great message either. And yes, the Catholic Church in particular is much more restrictive on how and when these things can occur, but it is a root core of their belief that demonic possessions can occur and that this is one of the forms of mediating it. And so then it does come into this position of, well, do we override what your religion is telling you because science is showing that it has more harm than it ever has had good? Or do you just allow that to happen and say, that's not my place, that's your religion, and your religious group needs to be maybe held accountable more so than the people themselves? Because that's where I have a struggle with, is if that's what you believe in, if that's what your church is telling you is real and is legitimate, and hey, maybe an exorcism is needed, how do you tell somebody not to listen to their religion, to their individuals like leadership team? Like, how do you tell them?
Leadership team, the priests and whatnot?
Yeah. Well, and the diocese and the bishops and all of that, like they are the ones who make the decision. Now, in this situation, obviously they bypass the whole bishop approval type of thing, but that still doesn't eradicate the potential for an exorcism to still occur. They're just extremely difficult to get approved.
Well, he approved it, but he didn't know how bad her health was, according to him.
He didn't read it.
Maybe. Yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure that was like stated, that he didn't read into it, like into the medical background.
So he just said, okay.
This is my perception from what I've read about this story, is that it seems like the level of persistence given by the family, and that her symptoms continuing to escalate and increase led to, okay, we'll approve it now. But it wasn't like it was like the first time they went to somebody and was like, hey, think we need an exorcism. And they're like, girl, we got you.
No, because they were too busy shopping around from priest to priest looking for the best deal, like a car lot.
They got denied multiple times because they felt it needed to be redistributed to a medical attention.
And then they found Kurt Russell on the used car lot, and he finally said, yeah, I got your deal.
Yeah.
I'm going to play devil's advocate, so to speak, on this one.
Oh boy!
Oh,
can't use that terminology here. How funny!
Like, I don't want to discredit one way or the other. What I will say is that if it's not true, doing The Exorcist may have a great placebo effect on the person who's afflicted. At least a good enough placebo effect to get it to the point where you can continue to seek further help or be more open to it once it's all said and done. The thing that I worry about, particularly to this case, is that even back then, they had ways of force feeding people. They had the ability of doing something to make sure the person stayed calorie rich. Hearing things like, well, she didn't want to do this and she didn't want to do that. She wasn't in control. She was running around, hanging around with Lucifer, Cain, Bob the Builder.
Don't forget about Hitler.
And Hitler. She was hanging out with all these demons that, why are we letting her dictate whether or not she can eat or whatever? So
true, the demons are making those decisions at that point.
Absolutely. So
Truly.
I don't see the point in allowing her the ability of making decisions and taking it to the extreme in which they did, to the point where she lost her life. They could have done something. But again, 6 or 7 exorcism in, and I find out that we got Hitler, Lucifer, and all these other guys hanging around inside her head. I'm getting a bigger boat.
Yeah, that's where you do call the Pope and say, look, we're going to need the big hat.
Yeah.
We cannot do this on her.
I need you to bring the mortar with the incense so we can knock her upside the head with it. I need somebody with bells. We need everybody.
And I stress, especially to your point, that okay, she's saying she wants this, she wants that, she wants to starve herself to death. How do you know that's her and not the demon? How do you know that's her and not the evil priest? Like, you're making an assessment that I don't know if you're capable at this point to be making. And that's where it gets very, very, very complicated.
Yeah, because either way, whether it's her own decision and it's her psychiatric condition that's driving her down the malnourishment stage, or it's the demonic possession that's doing it. Either way, somebody's in control that isn't Anneliese, right? Like, yes, ultimately, that's the takeaway.
It's not her. Absolutely. And the reason why, and during the description, I alluded to The Exorcist, right? Because the book came out in 1971, the movie came out in 1973. It's because it's right around this exact time. And what it did was it did create a world where this was a very popularized concept. Very many people believed very wholeheartedly in the concept of exorcism and demonic possession and whatnot. And I'm obviously, I don't think this woman faked it. I don't believe that in any way, shape, or form. But I do think heightened popularity does infect the mind to a degree, right? People start to see things where they wouldn't have seen those before. They might have looked a different way before. And I do think when things become popular like that and give credence to a bit of an archaic religious aspect like exorcism, I think it does kind of infect people's minds to think, oh, maybe that's definitely what it was. That's what it was. We need priests to exorcise the demons out of her because it's the exact same thing as what happened here. And I do think that's something to consider. Not saying that that's the case. I'm just saying it's something to consider. Now, let's move on to the movie. And we'll come back a little bit to the real life as well. So The Exorcism of Emily Rose, the movie itself, without any real knowledge of the case, obviously, apparently I'm the only one that hadn't seen this thus far. Is that fair?
Yep.
Really?
No, I saw this a long time ago, and I believe I owned this on DVD.
DVD? You didn't upgrade though, huh?
No, I didn't upgrade. I didn't see the purpose in upgrading.
I gotta tell you, I was very happy to learn it was more of a trial situation. I'm a sucker for a courtroom drama. Love a good courtroom drama. I love when you're putting science versus religion on trial, and I think it's always very intriguing if handled well. I think this was kind of okay. I don't think it's a great film in any way. I feel like the scares are not really scary. I really did not like trying to bring the lawyer into it. It really made it feel like, no, we're choosing the side of religion, and instead of making it more of a skeptic's argument or more of a, you can see it either way. I feel like by the end of the movie, you can't see it any other way. You see it as this happened and it was real. That's the movie.
Yeah. While the prosecution is doing their part of the story, they could have told the story in more of a way like they did for the defense, where they're showing you scenes of Anneliese's life and the things that she's going through from a more scientific or medical point of view. And then when you go to the defense, you see everything from the religious point of view. That would have probably made the movie a bit more interesting.
See, I felt like this was really trying to give us, it was trying to do two things at once. It was trying to convey both sides for both, just like John said, the prosecutor and the defense. But the thing that happens, which leads to Erin's point, is that the perspective becomes skewed. We no longer are looking at both sides. We are only seeing, we lean more onto what the priest is experiencing and saying.
Mm-hmm.
We lean more on what she, being Laura Linney, her character needs to have executed like as her job expectation. So of course they're going to drive them and try to find, answers through what they need, but it does start to lose its unbiased. And I think it started off where it was trying to give you the unbiased approach where you get to see both lenses,
Mm-hmm.
but by the end, that is not the case. And I don't know, I think for like a demonic possession movie, one that's trying to convey demonic possessions and how crazy, this case was, I think it was a fun movie from that perspective. But when you think about the, humanity behind it all, that this was a real individual and that, they're in the real case per se, from multiple perspectives in a court of law, that was not, in fact, how things went down. That is not, in fact, what occurred. And I feel like they missed a lot of key elements to helping to explain the other side of it, helping to explain why the psychiatric perspective or lens was maybe more applicable than the religious lens in this particular situation. Not really sharing as detailed how extensively it went in years prior, how long it took for it to escalate from one to another, who all was involved, how many times they were declined, finding someone to do these exorcisms. Like, I feel like a lot of those details were missed in the movie and could have been much more heavily emphasized to give more of a robust, dual-sided perspective so you can see everyone's approach. But
sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure that's why they say, well, it's inspired by a true story and it's a whole new character and it's a different setup. Yeah, but it's also very
similar. They don't say
similar.
it's inspired by a true story. They say this is a true story.
Yeah, that's true. They do say that. Yeah.
So you're definitely misleading people from the get-go from that standpoint.
Yeah. Well, they did change the name to protect the innocent, right? Just like Law and Order. So they did do that. Laura Linney, I think, is fantastic. No doubts there. I think we all agree. She was great. I think Tom Wilkinson was very good as Father Moore. He's very earnest and devout. Not earnest. Ernest. Campbell Scott is fine. I think he's a little too intense here as the prosecuting attorney. He's obviously got a chip on his shoulder and he's speaking out on behalf of Emily Rose, so to speak. But at the same time,
I think they could have cast that better or written it. Maybe it was how it was written too, to be fair.
Either way, could have been done better. I will say Jennifer Carpenter, who I love in Dexter, by the way, if you've never watched Dexter.
Of course.
She plays Emily Rose, and she does a very good job because basically every time we see her, she is an absolute horror, right? She is panicked, she is terrified, she screams, half of her lines are screaming. I think she does as much as she can with the role, and she does make us care about this girl. But I completely agree with everything Amanda said about the film itself. Like, it misses a big opportunity to really be a strong, powerful film where you have to look at both sides of an argument. And I feel like if they were actually taking on the real case and actually covering all of that, that could have been an extremely powerful film. And once they injected the lawyer having problems at 3 a.m. and everything else, and of course, she's going to wake up at the clock and she's going to see stuff. And once they injected that into the storyline, I think it kills the whole fascinating portion of the film that I enjoyed. Otherwise, it just became a straight up, okay, so really the demons exist and da-da-da-da.
The one thing that I'll say with that is I can see it, had it been done just a tiny bit differently, I can see the value and the benefit of having her character subjected to, well, these are the things that happen. And then she starts to notice those things happening to her that are normally inconsequential and don't mean anything. But when you have the, I guess, preconceived notion and you're going in with what you should be expecting and looking for, you start to find those things. It's confirmation bias, right? I'm going to now hyper focus on the things that I have been told, hey, these are things to be aware of. Well, of course, you're going to start to observe those things happening more often. Or sometimes what happens is the brain manifests them as a protection or survival mechanism. So I think that could have still been a very cool way of integrating and showing how, even, and I'm going to use the name from the movie, Emily Rose could have also led herself into falling deeper into this, right? Like, okay, you have schizophrenia, you have these conditions, you have this perception that there are multiple demons possessing you or attempting to possess you and do evil. And when you start to think that and believe it, you start to really make it happen. And so that would have been the cool part to see, is how, as humans, when we are told to be observant of something, our brains instinctually start to identify those things. And sometimes we will bring them to life unintentionally.
It's almost like they tried to do that with Dr. Mueller, the psychiatrist that was there for the Exorcist, because
a little bit.
They tell his story about how he hadn't been very religious for years, and he shows up because as a favor to Father Moore, and then all of a sudden he's in this state of shell shock after the whole incident, to the point in which the first time we see him, he's just in shell shock. The second time we see him, he's trying to leave the country because of how scared he is at everything, to the point where he gets hit by a car.
And there's no more skepticism at that point. This is just a story about demons.
Right. There's too many things in which they could have picked up the ball and told a deeper story. It's almost as if they had either cut out a lot of it, or they just decided this is a story about possession as opposed to what it is.
Yeah, we're just going to make a horror movie.
Even then, it's not that effective of a horror movie.
It's not an effective horror movie. And I will say, that's where I take issue with the direction. I feel it doesn't work for me either way. It doesn't work for me as a courtroom. It's an okay movie. Okay. But every time it's going for scares, all they do is amp up the music and cue Jennifer Carpenter screaming her head off. That's it. That's your scare.
Can we also super quick give Jennifer Carpenter all of the credit and praise, because she actually traumatized her crew and cast, because she was like, I'm quite flexible. I can do this myself when it came to the convulsions and the contortions.
Yeah.
And she did that herself. That's not CGI. That's freaking creepy. Good for her.
Yeah,
she's terrifying.
She's great, but unfortunately, that's the limit of the scares. And you're talking about a horror movie. Well, it's not horrific.
Right.
It's not a horror movie. It's not scary in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion. And the trial aspect doesn't do enough of did they or didn't they kind of thing. There's not enough skepticism. It's very much leaning heavily into it's demonic. Yeah, she's 100% possessed by demons. There's no part of me, by the time you get to about the middle of the movie, there's no part of me that believes that the creators of the film believe that there's any skepticism to exist. And that's the problem with it.
And it's partly because the lens and the approach is through Father, right? Like, it's his story. He's telling her story. We're not telling Emily Rose's story. He is wanting to tell Emily Rose's story. And so the film is going to follow.
But even when we have a doctor, have a doctor The doctor is basically on board with, oh yeah, hell yeah, there's demons. I don't even know why I went to med school. Should have went to hell school. I don't know. I think this could have been a great film. It's just an okay film. It's one to watch and then move on to the next one come Halloween, to me. But I am a big fan of cast Laura Linney in anything you want to. And the biggest issue I have with the movie is that she doesn't take the partner deal at the end. Come on.
Stupid.
It's ridiculous. She would have taken that deal. I don't care how much God she found. All right. Now, what did the movie get right and did it respect the victims? We talked a little bit about that. I think in respect to the true character that it's based on, Anneliese Michel, I do not think it respected her at all. And it kind of just told the story that this is just a girl that was demonized and not really focused on what this is my belief, right? Because I'm a skeptic, I guess, that girl suffered from extreme mental illness. And I think, to me, I can't see how you see it any other way at this point in time. Obviously, I'm not talking about 1975. I'm talking about now.
Yeah. This one's, it's a sad story to really dissect and understand after you've seen the movie.
One of the things it does right is sort of leave you in this position where you're like, if this is real, then she did good for a lot of people. Where if you look at what's happened with her gravesite has become a point of pilgrimage for a lot of religious folk. The town doesn't necessarily like it so much, but her gravesite is someplace that's visited a lot as somebody who was able to absorb a bunch of sin for those who were afflicted in the area.
If you tend to believe that, sure. Yeah. I don't know if I think that's a good thing necessarily, because I think it's ignoring the fact that this girl needed psychological help and it's just being blamed on the devil when it could have been assisted by science.
I think it just perpetuates the issue. I mean, not to take away from John's perspective, I think that's very sweet that people are so bought into wanting to love and support someone who, at the end of the day, went through something very horrible and traumatic and just very, I don't even have the right words to convey the things that you've seen in the pictures of where she was at in her final states. So I do have love and appreciation and respect for people wanting to show their love and support of Anneliese from that standpoint. But I think it does neglect and perpetuate this standpoint that there was a whole medical condition that could have been properly treated. To be fair, wasn't being properly treated up to that point. They hadn't gotten resolution to her symptoms. She wasn't improving. At some point, she had declined. So they needed to obviously change her medication potentially, or what they were doing to assist her. But I think, to maybe what Erin is saying, it does take away from the fact that this woman was essentially allowed to die. I don't want to say that she was murdered, because she wasn't murdered, but she was allowed to die in front of other people. Mm-hmm. They allowed that to happen. They did not intervene in the way that they should have, and that most people would without the religious lens. And it's not to take away from, you have to not believe in demonic possession to be able to do the right thing here. No, it's saying you can absolutely hold those beliefs, but at what point are you going to also supplement and make sure that the body is healthy too? That this person can survive when the demons are gone.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the reason she died, and this is the fact, is malnutrition. She died from just not having any sort of nutrients in her body left. And she had lost all of her weight. So there was an opportunity to intervene and to assist somehow in some way with her.
It's just tragic. I do think they paint the priests too positively here, because of that exact fact. There were two of them. One of them should have said, no, we can't. We're God's servants. We can't be part of this. In my mind, based on the religion I grew up with, that would never be okay. Like, it just wouldn't. We're going to allow her to die for other sins, et cetera, et cetera. That just wouldn't happen. And it's very convenient that the demons were all finally excised right before her death. I just find that to be a ridiculous argument. But
well, once you lower property values, it's time to go.
Wow. Okay. So what the movie got right or left out, and was it worth it? We kind of already talked about what it got right and what it left out pretty much in detail. Was it worth it? I mean, did it make the movie more entertaining? I think actually I would prefer a very closely detailed docudrama than what we got here. It just felt like a kind of a, I don't want to say cheap because it doesn't look cheap and you've got great actors and whatnot, but it's just a cheap horror movie when it should have been so much more. It could have been so much more.
I go back to saying that if they would have added more of the same visuals like they did for the spiritual part to the mental health part and really played off of the balance of those two, it would have made it a much, much more interesting story. The fact that we only really get one side visually and then the other side is told to us doesn't make it all that interesting to me.
I'm kind of right in the same boat with Erin. It feels like the movie's trying to do two different types of films in the same movie, which is somewhat fine, but I think it was a decent movie. It could have been a lot better had it either chosen to be more of the drama focus or more of the horror focus. One thing that I'll also add, which is just nuts, is that over the last, I don't know, handful of years, possession requests have tripled. So now they see approximately 500,000 requests a year.
What?
Mm-hmm.
For exorcisms?
Yes, for demonic possessions and needing an exorcism.
So we're getting more inclined to do this.
Well, they're not being approved at that same rate, but they're being submitted at a higher rate. So more people are believing that they or someone they care about is possessed. And my question is, where were all these demons like 40 years ago? If there's so much more possession now, wouldn't those same entities have been alive 40 years ago?
Maybe they're just pissed off.
That's what happens when you gentrify the neighborhoods. A whole bunch of people just start showing up.
Sad state of affairs. I did not know that, but thanks for telling me the devil is everywhere. That's great.
The devil is everywhere. Yeah.
That's great. And again, keep in mind, I'm not knocking religion at all. Just this one particular concept is one that I think is a little too... people jump to that conclusion much quicker than need psychiatric help. Maybe they just don't want to hang out with me anymore. You know, I mean, there's a lot of different things that are just thrown in there that I think should be considered.
Yeah, maybe
before.
She was howling like a dog on the floor for 2 days or whatever because she just didn't like him.
Yeah, she's just done. It's a sad story. The real story.
It's horrible.
She felt too bad to sit there and say, I need you to leave. So she's just going to howl on the floor. I get it. I've been there.
I'm sure you've dated someone like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And they didn't have a mental condition.
No, she definitely
diagnosed.
Definitely had him. My opinion.
No, she just screamed at me and then floated in the air and took a swipe at the wall.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please share the show on your social media outlets and maybe share it 6 times in honor of all these demons. And give us a review in your favorite podcast app. You are our best source of promotion, so tell your true crime maniac friends about it. And thanks for listening to Inspired by a True Story. I want to remind everybody that this is it for horror movies for a little bit. We just wanted to kick off October in the right fashion, so we're going to move on to other true crime films next. Okay? You guys okay to go back to some real true crime?
Yeah.
Well, this was real true crime. Let's not take away from that. But I'm ready for some non-spiritual.
Right.
Some simple, old-fashioned brother against brother murder would be great.
Stabbings. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just stop pissing the devil off. Okay?
Deal.
Thanks for listening. Now, let's keep those artists honest.